Chuck Norris spent decades building an image the world admired: discipline, strength, and unshakable control. But behind that image was a truth he carried quietly for 26 years. In 1962, at just 22 years old, married and still finding his place in life, he made a decision that would follow him for decades. A brief relationship led to the birth of a daughter he didn't know existed. While he went on to become a global icon, that part of his life remained hidden. Not out of pride, but because he simply didn't know. When the truth finally reached him in 1991 through a letter from his daughter, Dina, it wasn't scandal that defined the moment. It was how he responded. He chose acceptance over denial, responsibility over distance, and in doing so, showed a different kind of strength the world rarely sees. A childhood far from heroic. Long before fame, Chuck Norris was just Carlos Ray Norris, a boy growing up in Ryan, Oklahoma, a place small enough that most people had never heard of it. His early life was marked by instability and hardship. His father struggled deeply and was often absent, leaving Chuck's mother, Wilma, to hold the family together under constant pressure. They moved frequently, rarely staying in one place long enough to feel settled. Money was always tight, and the emotional strain was even heavier. Chuck wasn't the confident figure people imagine today. He was shy, withdrawn, and struggled with a stutter that made him avoid speaking whenever possible. School wasn't a place where he thrived. It was a place where he felt invisible. But even in that quiet, uncertain version of himself, something was slowly forming beneath the surface. Starting over in California. When his parents divorced, it marked a turning point for the family. His mother gathered what little they had and moved her sons in search of a better life. They eventually settled in California, but the change in location didn't immediately change how Chuck saw himself. He carried his insecurities with him. At 16, he was still deeply introverted, unsure of his future, and afraid of being judged for where he came from. He didn't stand out in school or sports. In many ways, he felt stuck between who he was and who he might become. There was no clear path forward, just a quiet desire to escape the limitations that seemed to define his life up to that point. A risk that changed his direction. At 18, Chuck made a decision that surprised even those closest to him. He joined the United States Air Force. It wasn't driven by ambition or a sense of adventure. It was practical. He needed stability, income, and a way to support his young marriage. At the time, he was far from physically imposing, weighing around 140 pounds and lacking any real athletic background. Yet something about that decision set him on a path he couldn't have predicted. Being stationed in South Korea exposed him to a completely different environment, one that would quietly reshape his identity. What began as a necessity soon became the foundation of everything he would later achieve. Discovering strength through discipline. In Korea, Chuck encountered martial arts for the first time. It wasn't love at first sight, it was curiosity mixed with boredom and a need for direction. But once he started training, something clicked. Martial arts gave him structure, focus, and a sense of control he had never experienced before. He wasn't naturally gifted, which made his progress even more meaningful. He trained relentlessly, pushing through pain and frustration, slowly transforming both physically and mentally. The discipline he developed didn't just make him stronger, it gave him confidence. By the time he earned his black belt, he was no longer the quiet, uncertain young man who had arrived. He had begun to understand what he was capable of becoming, building something from nothing. Returning home in 1962, Chuck didn't wait for opportunities. He created them. When plans to join the police force stalled, he opened a small martial arts school instead. At the time, martial arts weren't widely popular in the United States, making it a risky move, but he believed in what he had learned and what it could offer others. His teaching went beyond techniques. It focused on discipline, respect, and self-improvement. Students were drawn not just to his skill, but to his mindset. Many of them saw parts of themselves in his journey. The small studio became more than a business. It became a place where people could rebuild their confidence. just as he had done. Failure before success. Chuck's early competitive career was filled with setbacks. He entered tournaments with determination, but faced repeated losses against more experienced fighters. Those defeats were public and difficult, but they didn't stop him. Instead, they pushed him to improve. He studied his opponents, refined his techniques, and trained with even greater intensity. Over time, the losses became fewer, and the victories began to stack up. By the late 1960s, he had transformed himself into a dominant force, eventually becoming a world champion and holding that title for years. His success wasn't sudden. It was built on persistence, patience, and the willingness to learn from failure. From fighter to film star, Chuck's transition into Hollywood wasn't planned. It began with a chance connection, his friendship with Bruce Lee. Their mutual respect led to an opportunity that would introduce Chuck to a global audience. Appearing in The Way of the Dragon gave him visibility, but it didn't guarantee success. The early years in Hollywood were uncertain. He took small roles, faced criticism, and struggled to find his place in an industry that didn't quite know what to do with him. But he kept going, just as he had in martial arts. Over time, his authenticity and physical presence resonated with audiences, turning him into a recognizable action star. A career built on persistence. By the 1980s, Chuck Norris had carved out a unique space in Hollywood. His films weren't about flashy effects. They were about straightforward action and clear moral lines. Movies like Missing in Action and The Delta Force connected with audiences who appreciated his grounded style. Later, Walker, Texas Ranger, expanded his influence even further, bringing his values of justice and discipline into millions of homes. Beyond entertainment, he became a cultural symbol. The rise of internet memes only amplified that image, turning him into a larger-than-life figure for a new generation. Yet, behind the humor and exaggeration was a career built on steady effort and consistency, facing the past and choosing growth. When Dina reached out in 1991, it forced Chuck to confront a part of his past he had never known. His response defined the moment. He didn't question or reject her. He accepted her immediately. That choice reflected growth, accountability, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Over time, he spoke openly about the situation, acknowledging his mistakes and emphasizing that no child should ever be defined by circumstances beyond their control. It wasn't about repairing the past. It was about doing what was right in the present. That moment added depth to his story, showing that strength isn't just physical, it's also emotional and moral. A life defined by real strength. Chuck Norris's story isn't just about martial arts, movies, or fame. It's about transformation. From a shy, uncertain child to a confident world champion, from personal mistakes to personal growth, his journey reflects the kind of strength that develops over time. He faced challenges, made mistakes, and carried responsibilities that weren't always visible to the public. Yet through it all, he remained committed to improving himself and supporting the people around him. The legend people talk about today isn't just built on action scenes or achievements. It's built on resilience, honesty, and the ability to keep moving forward, no matter what life puts in the way.